How many of you here, this is Scarborough, it's this neighborhood that grew up around schools as they were built to accommodate a growing population. Many people in United Church congregations, it seemed, all happen to be teachers. How many of you are teachers here? Excellent, okay, good. So we have some teachers who can maybe help turn this perspective into perspectives by offering some of what they have, they know from being in the classroom as I talk about this learning and being. Morissette's lyrics, as they were posted, that was from her refrain, obviously, on the slide. She also talks about getting her heart trampled. She thinks that that's an excellent experience for anyone to get if they want to learn. To walk around naked in your living room. I'm not sure what the learning there might be, but you might never know. And biting off more than you can chew. How many people have ever done that? Has anyone ever learned from it? Yeah, we all learned from that one. Sticking your foot in your mouth. Oh my goodness. Yes, a very familiar experience to many of us. I did it just the other day, badly. So her song talks to us about how we can learn and what it is that has offered learning to her, experience to her. This album came out in 1995. She subsequently blissed out on an experience in India and become a little more reflective. Who knows if she would say that there are other ways to learn now. But we're going to look at how we learn and find out whether or not it's really what we thought it has been all along. The reading that Carrie shared with you was from Frank McCourt's Teacher Man. How many of you have read Frank McCourt's books? Phenomenal books. He was born in America, but when he was very young, went back to Ireland with his family, with his parents, and there lived an excruciating poverty that is stunning in its capacity to enter you viscerally and help you feel the extreme hunger, the extreme marginalization, the extreme nature of religious education and what it can do to a young soul. It's a bitter book, but incredibly beautifully crafted. McCourt had retired from teaching and felt that he wanted to say something about his life, and so feels that this was actually his second chance at life, his second chance to score where he wanted to score, to make a difference, to be remembered. And the book was so well received and so critically acclaimed that he catapulted to the top of the literary circles and found himself feted by everyone from presidents to movie stars, and every board of education clamored for his attention. Shortly after finishing his book, Angela's Ashes, he wrote about his experience moving to America, coming back as a young man, his mom sending him off to the hope and the promise and the possibility inherent in a life in the United States of America. But once again, it wasn't everything that it was cracked up to be. And McCourt experiences poverty, experiences the challenges of trying to get grounded and centered in a crazily busy metropolis. In the course of writing that book, he tells an experience of his teaching at a high school in Staten Island, his first teaching experience. And he explains that he's having a challenge dealing with these kids who are tough as nails and interrupting him all the time. But while he's cleaning out the classroom, trying to make some more space for them, he comes across a bunch of notebooks. They've been stored there, thrown there really, and left there for a couple of decades. And he pulls them out, and they're notebooks that were written probably before the war, or sometime before the war. Notebooks that were written by people who, it turns out, when he offers them to the kids in the classroom to read them, they're written by their parents and their grandparents, their uncles, people that they knew, who lived and loved and screamed and bled and cried as hard as they did in exactly the same community, experiencing those same things. And it transformed his relationship with that classroom because they could feel that there was some history there, that how they were in their lives was related to how others who had sat in those same seats, related to how they had lived their lives, some of them not being able to live them very long and having died not long after those notebooks had been written. And so those students engaged in the learning process in a different way. But that was really the only thing that McCourt talked about in his book, Tis. It was really about his trying to become the American he had born to be, but to find his roots in that great country. So when he finished it and it was published and went on to the same kind of success that Angela's Ashes was, he felt that he had really kind of shortchanged his profession, that he hadn't really spoken about teachers and about what it was they offered. He thought, in his introduction to his last book, Teacher Man, he talks about what it is that he thought would happen when he went into this profession. Raising up the next generation, placing in their minds all this incredible information, teaching them values and helping them to see the world in ways that would allow them to interface with it and change it in a really positive way. That he should get medals for doing that. That teachers who live their every life crafting the future by what they do in the front of a classroom, that they should be recognized heroes for what they do. Of course, it's not like that. There's a couple of days you might be recognized as doing something profound and wonderful, but often it doesn't come with that kind of acclaim. It often comes with something more akin to notoriety than acclaim. When kids come home and tell you about the teachers, and every one of us has a story about a teacher we hated, we couldn't get along with, who was horrible to us. We remember those really easily. So when teachers strike, we're all ready to get angry with them. We forget about those heroic efforts that they make on a day-to-day basis. So he wrote the book, Teacher Man. He talked about what it was to be in that community, in that environment, with these kids who were struggling with what their lives were going to look like. Most of them facing a dead end before they even finished high school. Most of them feeling kind of a despair. Most of them from families that experienced such stress on a day-to-day basis that it was a wonder they got to school at all. His first day in that school, his first day teaching, he went into a classroom and a fight broke out immediately. The kids knew that he was a new teacher. They knew they could get away with a lot. They pressed and poked and were belligerent and completely ignored him. In the course of the scramble taking place at one point, one of the students said, "Hey, what's anybody got for lunch? I got bologna again. Want to trade?" And in the midst of it, he threw the sandwich and it landed squat on the floor in front of McCourt. Here he is, brand new teacher. He knows he should do something about the kid that threw things. He knew he should do something about the scramble that was taking place and the profanity. He knew he should deal with all of that. But instead, he picked up the sandwich. Might have been something about the scent as it flew past him that led him to believe it wasn't your typical bologna sandwich. So he picked it up and recognized that it was a sandwich made by someone who filled it with love, with all kinds of sauces and trimmings that made it a phenomenal sandwich, not just a bologna sandwich. So he took it out of its wrapping and he ate it right there in front of the class. The students were mesmerized. They stopped talking immediately. They just sat there and stared at him, not believing that he would do something as reckless as that. Some of them might have been quiet because they saw the principal standing in the window watching what was going on, coming by just to incidentally check what McCourt was doing in his first day in his first class, and watching him instead eat a sandwich. So there was a knock on the door and the principal came in and asked if he could see Mr. McCourt out in the hall. And of course, when he went out into the hall, he dressed him down for eating his lunch in front of these kids, some of whom were probably hungry. And did he think that was really a wise thing to do on your first day in a class? McCourt, of course, didn't explain the situation because he knew that what he needed was a sandwich for every other class he was going to face in the rest of the day. But he was pretty sure the principal wouldn't be able to work that out. So what McCourt did with that belligerent class, with that group of people and those sprinkled through all his classes, who interrupted and asked questions. Hey, are you Irish? Hey, did you ever get married? Hey, what happened, with the war there? Were you in the war? Hey, this and hey, that, and all kinds of things. Interrupting him and causing him to tell these long stories about his life while he was trying to teach, trying to get spelling into them, trying to get them to understand grammar or read the classics, trying to get them to embrace something that might turn up on an exam, that might reflect what kind of teacher he was. But mostly he just told them stories, because in the telling of the stories, he was able to captivate them with an understanding of the world that was bigger than what they had. And in the process, they learned much. When we went to school, many of us in our first few years of school would have taken intelligence tests, got our IQ. Our parents sometimes were told, sometimes they weren't. It was never a good thing if you were given a high IQ, because then the performance issues started right away. Oh, I know how smart you are, and you're smarter than this. From then to grade 13 or grade 12 now. Intelligence tests were created well over a century ago, and they were exams that helped you test your knowledge, really, test your performance around that knowledge rather than really your intelligence. And over the course of the last few decades, we've come up with other things that help us understand how intelligence works, and that people's intelligence is not necessarily just the thing that's going to, take them to acclaim or build for them a promising and sound career, that there are a variety of things that go into that mix. But in the last 10 years or so, brain imaging has taught us a whole lot more. We found out different parts of the brain that are stimulated by learning in different ways. And comparing them with some of the tests that have taken place, some crazy tests that were online that researchers thought might draw a few hundred responses, that brought in over 100,000 responses. People are eager to understand how they learn and what their intelligence is. But what those tests showed, and what the brain imaging reinforces, is that there isn't a single intelligence. That there's a variety of intelligences, and there are people that are more intelligent than other people. If there were people who are more intelligent than other people, then all those different things would show the intelligent people doing really, really well on all those tests, and the people who weren't so intelligent doing less, and the people who were really challenged doing poor. That's not what showed up. What showed up was in the different modalities and the different ways that people learn, and the different ways that people can express what it is that they know and they learn. That people were good in a variety of different things and not so good in others. That intelligence is this mix of stuff. It's not those IQ tests we took as kids. Wrong. Boy, could I wished my parents had known that. So we find ourselves entering a world where our understanding of education, our understanding of intelligence is radically changed. Some of what I learned while listening to one of Roberta Walker's Think About It programs on the CBC helped me understand why, years later, I could remember one question on my MBA, the GMAT exams. I walked out of that room so upset that I'd missed a few questions, and the few questions were the only ones I could remember, were the ones that I forgot, that I didn't have an answer to. They stewed around in my head for ages. I answered most of them over the course of time, but there was one that I just couldn't get. And Walker, in conversation with Adrian Owen, helped me understand that it's not just my intelligence that grabbed hold of those questions. It's because I was having an emotional reaction to the questions when I experienced them that I remembered them. There's an emotional hook that calls us to remember something, that drives something into our memory in a new way. And memory is one of those modalities. Memory, the ability to reason, and our verbal abilities. Those are the three different ways in which we learn and in which we can express what it is that we learn. So if you can get something tied to an emotion, your memory of it will improve incredibly. Usually it's supposed to be a good emotion. That wasn't particularly a good emotion. But there are ways that we can draw children into an experience of a lesson that touches them emotionally. One of the examples given in the program was of a teacher who taught about a child stranded in the Rocky Mountains, which drew out an emotional experience by people. The children used art and used their creativity to talk about what it would be like. They felt it in part of this science class, which taught them typical science stuff, but wrapped it up in this arts setting. And children, not in that particular class, but children who have been tested, who have had their science and their mathematics taught to them wrapped up in art, and children who have their science and their mathematics taught to them in traditional ways, they both score exactly the same on tests. So what's the point? The point is they score exactly the same on tests when those tests are done immediately after the learning. But if they're done 3 months later, the ones who have had those lessons tied up in the arts remember and respond much better than those who did the rote studying. And so teachers who are spending their time focusing and learning about brain mapping and brain understanding of that brain are better able to connect with their students. And so if they're better able to connect with their students, they become better teachers, then the students are better taught. It's a win-win situation for all of them. One of the things about the Walker program that sort of troubled me was that this idea that there are visual learners and auditory learners, and that we should teach, and kinesthetic learners, that we should teach in each of those modalities to individuals, was said to not be quite so true as we thought it was. So rather than having a teacher focus on a certain child who's identified as learning visually with exclusively visual images, or one who learns kinesthetically with exclusively kinesthetic stuff, that everyone uses all of them to one degree or another. And so the kind of classroom that brings all of those things together is the kind of classroom that's going to engage and teach children. I want to go back to Alanis Morissette and Frank McCourt. I called this everything I know I learned from Alanis Morissette. She's got some great songs. But I think that the things that she pointed out that we learn by are maybe not the things that we learn by so well. Crying and screaming and bleeding and all of that sad part of life. Because stress gets in the way of our ability to learn. Immediate, sudden, critical stress levels, acute stress, have an impact on substances in our brain that immediately start fragmentizing and disabling the dendrites in our neurons, which are the ways that information synapses connect and share information and store information. So as soon as we're under stress, we lose our ability to actually take in what's going around us, and learning it to any extent. And long-term stress has been shown for some time to have a very ill effect on learning and how we're able to hold on to information. So Morissette, when she's talking about all those stressful situations and that we learn from them, is not talking about the learning that happens in those moments, because that learning is probably not great. The learning takes place later, when you reflect upon the situation, when you go back and reorder what happened and do the timeline and wonder where your responses came from, and figuring out how deeply embedded those responses are in your heart and your mind and your body, and where they came from in your past. What was it that created that reaction, that response? What offered only fear to the experience? When we go back and we relate to those things in a way that allows us to get some distance and reflect on them so that we can bring something good out of them, that's a powerful and an important part of the process. And I think that's where Morissette was going, not so much to the immediacy of that stress and those chaotic times in one's life. And I think Frank McCourt had a lot going for him years before this work had ever been done, with his ideas of pushing aside the chairs and getting everyone to lie down. He knew that those kids' lives were filled with chaos, were filled with fear, were filled with despair, were filled with all kinds of concern. And the stress levels that they experienced in their homes and at school, where the demand was constantly to perform, often in ways that they couldn't do, that stress would eat away at their ability to learn. So in the midst of a class where McCourt wasn't even sure whether or not he would be able to offer them anything, he knew that one thing he could do is create a space so that wherever they went after that class, they'd be more open to getting something out of it. And so in a time that was years before anyone ever started talking about hooking learning or hooking mathematics to our emotional response and play and art, McCourt had it figured out. Scott talked about, and he's out of the room, right? So Scott talked about the work it is to be in relationship. And I want to talk about how we learn through that. Because the things that we focus on here are about right relationship with ourselves, with others, and with the world around us. And with ourselves, that reflection is an important piece of the process. When we're in relationship with other people, that learning has to happen too. But often, and studies have shown, that in close relationships, we often, a great percentage of us, stop actually being who we are and shut down who we are in order not to risk the relationship. One of the top 5 regrets that people who are in palliative care have is that they weren't themselves enough, that they didn't live out who they felt they really were, that they compromised on who they were. And so in relationship, we have those choices. We have the choice to be who we really are, or we have the choice to compromise and be something palatable to the relationship. My experience of relationship before meeting Scott was radically different from my experience in relationship with Scott, particularly when it got to conflict management stuff. I think I've told you this before, but my plan for conflict management previously was say what you mean and then leave the room. You know, you get it out, you feel better, and then you just leave the room. Scott has this annoying habit of following me out of the room. Yeah, it's been tough these 10 years. But it confronted me in what is often a stress-filled time with the opportunity to learn. In reality, I'm not going to learn in that stress-filled time. I'm only going to learn later, when I look back on it, when I think about it, when I check it out with what goes on in my body at that moment, what runs through my brain, where my heart starts pumping faster, what causes that, all the relationships that went before and everything that's happening now, and putting all that together. And then I can do the Alanis Morissette thing. I can actually get to the point where my screaming and my crying, it's not an everyday occurrence, don't worry, where that can have a powerful impact on building our relationship, on making us better together than we were the day before, on helping us find our way toward a more positive tomorrow, not just for our relationship, but for each one of us. As our kids get ready to go back to school, and we have all these ideas about learning in our heads, about how we learn in our relationships and how we learn in academic environments, how we learn through the arts, how we memorize things. As our kids head back to school, and I'm talking like corporately, like our kids out there are all going back to school. I'm hoping that we can find ways to learn to be present to them so that the stress that they experience in their lives doesn't preclude their learning. Studies are showing that adolescent brains function differently in reaction to stress, in reaction to reward, that they're particularly prone to addiction because of those reactions. And that perhaps the rewards that we can offer them on a daily basis, you did a great job, or what are you taking at school? Do you like it? What makes it meaningful? Just an engagement. That they can perhaps feed some of those parts of their brains that can take them through these challenging years and through this process and help them take from it a lot of really, really, really good stuff. My hope is that the teachers amongst us who stand up in classrooms will help us all find our roles as teachers, so that in every interaction that we have, we can find ourselves in an opportunity to teach through reflection, through example, through being present. I love Frank McCourt's image of a bunch of rough kids lying on the floor, falling asleep, singing lullabies, making jokes, and chilling out. And I love that he reminds us through that image that sometimes just being is the best teaching we can ever have. How many of you are teachers? Come on. You're all teachers. Hello. How many of you are teachers? You're all teachers. Thanks.